Jayden Daniels is currently the betting favorite to win the Offensive Rookie of the Year award. But Caleb Williams still has a strong case to win the NFL honor for the Chicago Bears.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1, and you can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. On the show today, we look at the path towards the Offensive Rookie of the Year award for both Jayden Daniels and Caleb Williams, and make the case for the Chicago Bears quarterback to move past the Commanders quarterback and ultimately finish the season as the league's top offensive rookie. We'll look at how Caleb Williams definitely started slower, but since then, he's more than caught up, and why there's some pretty compelling evidence that things may slow down a little bit more for Jayden Daniels, and that's Caleb Williams' opportunity to really pull ahead. But hey, it still requires Caleb Williams to have a strong rest of the season as well. There's no denying or disputing that Jayden Daniels has had the overall better start to their rookie seasons. If you look from week one until now, Jayden Daniels has higher completion percentage, more yards, fewer interceptions, more rushing yards, more rushing touchdowns, a higher passer rating, etc. When you look in the totality of the season so far, Jayden Daniels has produced better box score stats. Now, whether or not they've been asked to do the same things and what they're doing in the scope of their respective offenses is a little bit of a different story. But when we think about how the Offensive Rookie of the Year award is going to be handed out, it's more about narrative of the season and the box score stats than it is what they're asking Jayden Daniels to do versus what they're asking Caleb Williams to do. So it's not necessarily a strong argument to say, oh, well, Jayden Daniels is being asked to do less in Washington than Caleb Williams is. I think that's true, but I don't think the Offensive Rookie of the Year award voters will care too much about that. Caleb's first couple of games were certainly rough on the box score. 93 passing yards and a sub 50% completion percentage in week one against the Titans. And then even week two against the Texans, 0 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, only 175 passing yards. Whereas, Jayden Daniels didn't light it up the first 2 weeks, but was certainly more efficient than that throughout the process here. But since then, we've seen Caleb Williams, excuse me, wow, that hit me like a brick wall. We've seen Caleb Williams really take off from there. The last 4 games or so have really seen him burst onto the scene. And Jayden Daniels has continued to play well. And I think when you look at just what they've done lately, after that slow start for Caleb Williams, you can see exactly how Caleb has caught up to what Jayden Daniels are doing since week 3. So if you're talking weeks 3, 4, 5, and 6, you're looking at Caleb Williams with slightly more passing yards over that 4-game stretch. Caleb Williams with still a slightly lower completion percentage, but more passing touchdowns and more total touchdowns, only 1 more interception, and, not an embarrassingly low amount of rushing yards over that stretch. I mean, Jayden Daniels certainly has more, but it's not like Jayden Daniels is doubling up and running away from it, pun intended, in terms of the two guys and how they've matched up since week 3. If you take out a slow start for Caleb Williams and a slightly less slow start for Jayden Daniels, like all of Jayden Daniels' touchdowns have come over the last 4 games, so it benefits him too a little bit to cut out those first 2 games. This is obviously a smaller sample size that benefits Caleb Williams here, but the point being, like, if you look at where they've been lately, Caleb Williams is stride for stride, if not maybe even pulling slightly ahead of Jayden Daniels in the box score stats so far. Like, if you look since week 3, Jayden Daniels is averaging 250 yards a game and 1.5 touchdowns a game. And Caleb Williams is averaging 260 yards a game and 2 touchdowns a game. Like over the course of the year, over the course of the full 6 games, Jayden Daniels is averaging about 234 passing yards and 1 touchdown per game. He has been very efficient and effective for the Washington Commanders, but he hasn't necessarily had the types of spikes that we've seen Caleb Williams have in his games. Daniels has done what he's needed to do to win a lot of games and is playing very well, but he hasn't had a 300-yard passing game, and Caleb Williams has had 2 of those. And Jayden Daniels hasn't had a 4-touchdown game like Caleb Williams just had in Jacksonville. I think the peaks of what we've seen Caleb Williams do from a production standpoint have been a bit higher than what Jayden Daniels has done so far. It doesn't mean that it necessarily means that means Caleb is going to win the Offensive Rookie of the Year just because he's had some of those peaks. Like, it's of course going to be about what these teams do from here on out and how they do it when, both of their schedules get a little bit tougher, because plenty of people have been critical of Caleb Williams for, his best games now coming against some lower quality defenses with the Colts and the Rams and the Panthers and the Jaguars. And that's a valid point to raise against Caleb Williams, but it's also a valid point to raise against Jayden Daniels when some of his best games have come against a bad Bengals defense, a bad Arizona Cardinals defense, a struggling Cleveland Browns defense. I mean, even this past game against the Baltimore Ravens, that Ravens defense has not been playing up to the standard we normally expect of the Baltimore Ravens this season. So it's not an equal playing field that they've been on, but it's not as though Jayden Daniels has been playing against, the toughest defenses and still having these super, super high quality performances. He's still having great performances, and so is Caleb Williams, but I don't think we can detract from either one based on the teams that they've faced on the schedule so far. They can only play the team that's on the schedule, and all they can do is play their best, and they've both played some really good games, albeit against perhaps some very bad defenses here. But I have more questions about Jayden Daniels' ability to sustain this level of efficiency and success over the course of a full 17, 18 game season. And I have a little bit less question about Caleb Williams' ability to sustain what they're doing offensively, at least the individual production that comes with that. And some of it has to do with the way that they're being used in their offenses, and also just some of the history of the staffs around them and some of the issues that they've had in the past, and also a little bit of what's ahead for them on their respective schedules, where I think Caleb can keep some things rolling a little bit better, and maybe Jayden is going to be tested in some ways that he has not yet been tested. And if he can pass those tests and keep playing at a high level, he may very well be the Offensive Rookie of the Year. But I think Caleb Williams still has a pretty good shot at it here. So we'll kind of look at why I'm a little skeptical of how long Jayden Daniels can sustain this, and maybe more skeptical of that than Caleb Williams' sustainability next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by Arena Club. For most of us that like collecting cards, the idea of spending $2,000 or more on a Patrick Mahomes rookie card, for example, just isn't in the cards. I mean, that's some serious money to drop. But thanks to slab packs from arenaclub.com, now it's possible to score gem mints for a fraction of their retail price. Arena Club is the only repack that provides real value, a complete view of all possible cards, and clear hit rates for each one. Arena Club slab packs are revolutionizing the repack game with transparency. So whether you're buying, selling, trading, or displaying, Arena Club is the card collecting platform you have to check out. Right now, you can get 10% off your first slab pack or card purchase by going to arenaclub.com/lockedonnfl and using our promo code LOCKEDONNFL. That's Arena, ARENA, club.com/lockedonnfl, promo code LOCKEDONNFL for 10% off your first purchase. Locked On Bears is also brought to you by PrizePicks, the better way to play daily fantasy sports, because PrizePicks puts you in complete control. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. They set stat projections for every player, and you just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. It's a great way to have a little something more bring you interested in these games every week. Not just football, but basketball, baseball, hockey, soccer, you name it. You can play it at PrizePicks. Download the app today and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. You play $5 lineup, whether your lineup is successful or not, they're going to give you an extra $50 instantly in your account when you download the app and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL. PrizePicks, run your game. If Jayden Daniels and Caleb Williams do what they're doing right now and ride this out for the rest of the year, then I think Jayden Daniels will still win the Offensive Rookie of the Year award. But I'm a little bit more skeptical that, well, first of all, I don't think either one is going to maintain this exact current pace. But I'm more skeptical of Jayden Daniels' drop-off than potentially Caleb Williams' drop-off. And I think we'll get our first good measurement of this after the Bears bye week when they play Jayden Daniels and the Washington Commanders. Because this Chicago Bears defense will be the first real defense to test Jayden Daniels in some different ways. I think this will be the best defense he has played at this point in the schedule, and certainly the best defense he has played that actually has plenty of tape on Jayden Daniels to game plan for him and expect what Washington is going to throw their way. You know, the first couple of weeks of the season, they're trying a bunch of new stuff in Washington. Defenses don't have a lot of tape on Daniels and what that's going to look like. New coaching staff, new quarterback, and they've got a certain element of surprise, or if not surprise, at least, like preparation in advance of like, hey, we're going to throw some stuff at you that you couldn't have prepared for because we've never put this out on tape. But now that they'll be, 8 weeks into the season or whatever it is when those two teams play, the Bears will be the best defense that's really had a chance to look at the Washington offense and prepare for it with a little bit more focus and a little bit more knowledge of what that team is going to do. So that will be a very big test of like, okay, how sustainable is this for Jayden Daniels? But I think the more concerning thing for me with the Commanders and Jayden Daniels, as far as being able to sustain this, is just the general history of Kliff Kingsbury. That over his coaching career, you look back more than a decade, every single season, no matter where Kliff Kingsbury is coaching, his teams start the season hot and end the season cold. And it has been consistent when he was at USC last year with Caleb Williams, of all places, when he was the head coach of the Arizona Cardinals, and when he was the head coach at Texas Tech. And I want to give credit to Nick Whalen on Twitter, who's a great Chicago Bears follow, @_Nick Whalen, Whalen, tweeted out the records of the starts of the season for Kliff Kingsbury and the end of the seasons for Kliff Kingsbury. And like, this isn't just like some sort of like, you're nitpicking for stats to try and find a thing that'll fit your narrative. Like, this is consistently every single season it happens. I don't even have enough, room to try and fit every year in here, but Nick tweeted them all the way out back through, I think, 2013. So that's 11 seasons of Kliff Kingsbury years. But like, just to give you a sample here, you've got 2022, Kliff Kingsbury's last season with the Cardinals. They started 2-2. They finished 2-8. His second to last year, 2021, do you remember when the Cardinals started 7-0 and were one of the hottest teams in the NFL? And then they finished that season 4-7 over their last 11 games, which is still an 11-7 finish when you count making the playoffs and losing the playoffs. But like, they were well below 500 for the second half of that season after starting out so hot. The year before that, same story, 2020, the COVID year in Arizona, 6-3 start. Kyler Murray, MVP conversation, but then they finished that year 2-5 over the remaining games of the season, and like, that's a rough, abysmal finish. And you go down the list, even at Texas Tech, his last year at Texas Tech before he got hired by the Cardinals, 2018, the Texas Tech Red Raiders, that's what it is. The Red Raiders started 5-2, and then their last 5 games, they were 0-5. Like, every single season, dating back to 2013, when Kliff Kingsbury has been the head coach or the play caller or the offensive coordinator or the quarterback's coach in USC, like, his teams always start some degree of hot and always finish some degree of very cold, and particularly finishing very cold. Like 2-2, like we said, wasn't a super hot start in 2022, but 2-8 was a rough finish, and 0-5 is a rough finish. 2-5, 2-6 over his final like 7 and 8 games, pretty much every season. Now that doesn't guarantee that the Washington Commanders are going to lose 2 out of their last 8 games or whatever it is. I mean, and every year is different, every team is different, but when it's been literally every year for a decade, it's hard to fully trust that the Washington team's hot start is going to be something that's super sustainable, especially when they are going to play some better defenses ahead on their schedule. And I think the reputation that Kliff Kingsbury has is, okay, he comes up with these, good offenses and good ideas, and they kind of take the league by storm to start the year. And then other teams adjust to that after a handful of games. Like you kind of see the hot starts. They'll go 7, 8, 9 games even of hot start. Then teams kind of figure out, okay, here's how we can stop that. And then they tend to struggle to adapt and adjust to the adjustments to stay a step ahead of opposing defenses. And that's how they end up finishing slow after starting hot. So then if you look ahead from here for Washington, they have a tough Bears defense in week 8 coming after the Bears bye week. To be fair, Jayden Daniels has the Carolina Panthers week 7, so he's going to have another big game there. But then week 8, it's a tough Bears defense. Week 9, you've got a Giants team that's not a good football team, but at least like defensively, they rank in the top 10 in points allowed and 10th in yards allowed. They're not a terrible defense by any means. Not as good as the Bears, but not terrible. And then you got the Pittsburgh Steelers in week 10. Another really good defense. So a really good Bears defense, a decent Giants defense, and then a really good Steelers defense. Like back-to-back weeks. It's going to be more of a test for Jayden Daniels than he's seen so far up to this point in the season. Now, he will still play some bad defenses later on in their schedule. I mean, they got the Cowboys twice still going on this year. The Saints defense has been pretty bad. They got them towards the end of the year as well. So there's going to be games where, down the stretch, Jayden Daniels plays well and has really good performances. But I just wonder if the Bears, Giants, and Steelers don't put some film out there that ends up being a little bit more of like the blueprint for how to slow down or stop Jayden Daniels and the Commanders offense, so that then teams like the Eagles and the Titans and the Falcons and the Cowboys maybe even on their schedule can say, okay, the Bears and Giants and Steelers or whoever have showed us how to slow down Jayden Daniels. We'll just try and do that. And then it's up to Kliff Kingsbury and the Commanders' offensive staff to adjust to the adjustments and get things going back on track. And that's where I come back to Kliff Kingsbury's history here of always finishing slow. Like he has consistently failed to make the proper adjustments despite starting so hot. And that's where I'm a little bit nervous in just how well Jayden Daniels can sustain a lot of the success that they've had. And so if Jayden Daniels starts to drop off a little bit, that's Caleb Williams' window to pull ahead and reclaim some of that favorite for the Offensive Rookie of the Year award. But that also then requires Caleb Williams to keep playing at a high level. This would, we're talking about Jayden Daniels dropping off. Well, what if Caleb Williams drops off a little bit too? Like he also still has to be great. And there's some reason to be skeptical that yes, he will drop off a little bit. And it's going to be a matter of, can he drop off a little less than Jayden Daniels and sustain a little bit more of the success? We'll look at what's still ahead for Caleb Williams and what's going to matter most in trying to award the Offensive Rookie of the Year award to one of these two guys. Next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook. And right now you can get started with a big return on FanDuel because they're going to give you $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. So you can bet $5 on anything. For example, you could bet on Offensive Rookie of the Year, where the odds still have Jayden Daniels as the favorite at -190, but Caleb Williams is right behind him at +155. Or you can bet on any of your other favorite football teams, baseball, basketball, tennis, soccer, boxing, the combat sports, you name it, they've got it all at FanDuel Sportsbook. So to get your $200 in bonus bets guaranteed, win or lose on that $5 bet, you just place the bet, they're giving you the $50 guaranteed. There's the $200 guaranteed. To get those $200 guaranteed, just visit FanDuel.com or download America's #1 sportsbook. So I'm skeptical that Jayden Daniels will maintain his full success and this level of high-level efficient quarterbacking performances over the course of the season, which would then clear the way for Caleb Williams to play well and win the Offensive Rookie of the Year award. But he has to be good too. And he is also going to face a tougher schedule. Like, as much as, you want to dismiss the criticism of like, oh, the Bears have beat up on bad teams, it is true that they have played lesser teams. I still think it's something they can build off of and largely sustain, but they do still have to prove that. And just as much as we're going to see Jayden Daniels tested by the Bears defense after the Bears bye week in week 8 when these two teams play, Caleb Williams is also going to be tested a little bit more by the Commanders than these last couple of games. Again, the Commanders don't have a great defense by any means, but they haven't been terrible, and they've kept Jayden Daniels and company in a lot of their games. But I think the bigger key for Caleb Williams here is like, you look at what's still ahead on the schedule. He's got Washington with we'll call him an average defense, maybe slightly below average, depends on how you want to evaluate them. But I'm trying to be nice to the Washington Commanders fans that inevitably see this podcast and get mad about it and listen and want to rage about me being ignorant about Washington or whatever. That's fine. We'll call them an average defense. And then you get a below average defense with the Cardinals and a below average defense with the Patriots. So you still have like 3 more games of Caleb Williams playing manageable to easy quality of defenses on the other side. Like, he can keep building this up. At the same time, over that same stretch, Jayden Daniels is going to be playing the 3 best defenses on a schedule, or 3 of the best defenses on a schedule. So Caleb gets 3 easier games, Jayden Daniels gets 3 harder games. And if we see Jayden Daniels start to struggle over those games and Caleb Williams continuing to thrive over those games, I think the narrative of the offensive rookie of the year conversation will really start to shift. Where right now, Jayden Daniels is the big hot thing, and people want to have the big hot takes of, oh, did the Bears draft the wrong quarterback? I don't think anybody around here thinks that whatsoever, but people want to have the hot take nonetheless. And I think that narrative will start to shift if Daniels struggles while Caleb Williams continues to play well. And so much of the Offensive Rookie of the Year award feels like it's kind of a narratives and a vibes thing, right? Like, so sort of what they've been able to do this season, what's sort of the story of them over the course of the season. And that's where it's going to come down to like what Caleb Williams does against the toughest stretch of his schedule, where the Bears play 5 NFC North games in 6 weeks, starting with the Packers in week 11, the Vikings in week 12, the Lions in week 13. You sneak a 49ers game in there, which doesn't get any easier, in week 14, then the Vikings in week 15 and the Lions again in week 16. How well Caleb Williams gets through that will determine whether or not he wins the Offensive Rookie of the Year award. Like, I think Jayden Daniels is going to struggle a little bit and then kind of level out somewhere in between, like the great start and then the struggles. I think he'll level out somewhere in between. Caleb Williams is kind of riding high right now, and if he can maintain a decent enough level through those tough games, I think he can finish as the Offensive Rookie of the Year. But if he has just as big a drop-off as Jayden Daniels might have against those defenses, and then Daniels bounces back at the end of the year with easier games against the Saints and Eagles and Cowboys in the final 4 games of their season, I think that's what's going to push this horse race at the very end, because it does feel like so much of this Offensive Rookie of the Year award is not only narrative-based, but it's also a little bit more of like, it can be a little bit more of a team award in the sense that like, whichever one of these guys is winning more games with their team, even if maybe their stats aren't quite as good, but he's, quote unquote, carrying their team to more success, is more of an MVP for their team as a rookie than the other, can be a factor in who gets the Offensive Rookie of the Year award. And so I do wonder if Caleb Williams having the better defense around him will be able to carry him and his team farther than Washington, who has the better offense so far, but a much, much worse defense comparatively here. That if the Bears end up winning more games and Caleb Williams keeps them in those games and plays good, maybe not even elite, but just good in those games, well, maybe Jayden Daniels drops off a little bit and then his team goes 500 from here on out if they play some harder opponents and have the Kliff Kingsbury drop off at the end of the year. Do the Bears at 9 or 10 wins help Caleb get the award ahead of the Commanders at 8 or 9 or 7 wins over that stretch? I mean, 7 probably feels like too much of a drop-off for them, but you know what I mean? Like, the Bears have a path here towards leaning on the defense to win more games and pitching this narrative of like, look at the turnaround Caleb Williams has brought the Chicago Bears. Look at how they went from a team picking number 1 overall last year, but really picking, 9th overall last year, but going from such a bad below 500 team to now this maybe double-digit win type season for them. Whereas if Washington goes from 4-13 last year to 8-9 this year. That's a big turnaround, but it doesn't quite have the same storyline narrative that isn't even a good way to award Offensive Rookie of the Year. I'm not even saying this is good or the way it should be done, but it does feel like the way it is done nonetheless. I do think you should kind of take the quarterback or the rookie, whatever the rookie is, you should look at them sort of irrespective of the context around them and just say, okay, what has this player done? And who cares if they've won or lost a bunch? Has he been the better individual player compared to the better individual player on the other team? I feel like that's how it should be, but it doesn't always feel like that's how it's handed out. It can be a narrative thing, and the success of the team can go a long way towards shaping that narrative and that vibe of how the rookie quarterback is performing, even when the box score might say differently. Because I think we're seeing some of that right now with Caleb Williams and Jayden Daniels, where, again, over the last 3 or 4 weeks, Caleb Williams is having the better quarterback performances, but Jayden Daniels continues to have sort of the story and the narrative of he's having the great season because he's had the higher completion percentage. You'll certainly give him that along the way, but Caleb Williams just threw for 300 plus yards and 4 touchdowns in London. Didn't break 300 in London, but threw for 300 2 weeks ago and then threw for 4 touchdowns in London. He's having bigger games right now than Jayden Daniels. He's having bigger box score performances than Jayden Daniels, right? Over the last, just the last couple of games. And that hasn't totally flipped the narrative away from Jayden Daniels. As we said, Jayden is the FanDuel Sportsbook betting favorite right now. Caleb's close behind him, but the betting favorite is still Jayden Daniels, even though in the short term, the last couple of weeks, Caleb Williams is having better individual performances because it's a little bit more about the narrative and the bigger picture here. So if over the course of the season, Jayden Daniels drops off a little more than Caleb does, and Caleb wins a few more games than Jayden Daniels does, maybe the narrative switches enough that Caleb still comes away as the Offensive Rookie of the Year. Again, what it will come most down to is what these two quarterbacks do against the better defenses coming up on their schedule. I think Jayden Daniels has tougher tests in the quality of defenses he's playing against, and Jayden Daniels has a lesser defense on his own team to lift him through some of those more difficult matchups. And it's why I still see a clear path for Caleb Williams to win the Offensive Rookie of the Year, and why I'm more skeptical that Jayden Daniels will maintain this success. Because if his defense starts getting gashed, they start getting behind on the scoreboard more than they have up to this point in the season, is he going to remain as efficient? Is he going to press a little bit more? Is he going to try and do a little bit too much? Is he going to run into some of those rookie mistakes that they've been able to avoid so far, but feel like they're going to be inevitable at some point? So I think things are going to come down just a little bit more for Jayden Daniels in the near future. And if Caleb can continue at least somewhere close to where he's been the last couple of weeks as the quality of opponents get better, I think he will emerge as the Offensive Rookie of the Year. I'd love to hear what you think needs to happen in the Offensive Rookie of the Year race. What would put Caleb Williams ahead of Jayden Daniels? Or are you resigned to say, yeah, I think Jayden Daniels has got this one, but no worries. It's okay if Caleb Williams doesn't win Offensive Rookie of the Year? Let me know in the comments here on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, or you can tweet us at Locked On Bears, or post in the Locked On Bears Facebook group, or you can comment on Instagram or TikTok as well. However you do it, just make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you're listening to the Locked On Bears podcast, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. We won't have a Bears game on Sunday to break down for you on Monday's podcast, but we'll still be here for you to look ahead to what's coming up after the bye week, look back on what the Bears have been able to accomplish this season so far, kind of evaluate what this team has been able to do and how that sets our expectations for the rest of the year. So just because the Bears are taking the Sunday off doesn't mean we will here on Locked On Bears. So make sure you make us your first listen once again on Monday and every single day. And in exchange, I'll always give you another opportunity to bear down.